Alright, so I'm Olivia Martin, and I'll be talking to you about The Mortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, written by Rebecca Skloot. It's a story about an African-American woman whose cells were harvested and used to create an immortal cell line for scientific experimentation. Because there isn't much information about Henrietta and her family, Skloot wants to tell their story. But she doesn't realize how much backstory and emotional baggage there is until she starts gathering information. When she tries to connect with Henrietta's family, they're pretty hostile to the idea of speaking to another reporter because they're treated pretty badly by the media and scientific community. So Rebecca had to earn their trust in order to talk to them. She finds that when Henrietta was around 30 years old, she reaches out for help from Johns Hopkins Hospital because she had a knot on her cervix. In the process, some of her tissue was removed from the tumor and sent to George Guy's lab to be grown in test tubes without her family's permission. When they did this, they found an awesome scientific discovery where her cells didn't die, so they reproduced and they were sold for scientific studies around the world and even in space. They talked about mutating the cells and putting them together with mice and making hybrids, and it was crazy. And her family were not giving any compensation for this. In fact, they didn't know until several years later because reporters kept on spelling her name wrong. So I chose 5 different categories to analyze this book. The first was zingers and good portrayals of Skloot's personal voice, and I found that she used many of these zingers when she was ending each chapter. For example, the first chapter ends with doctors saying there is no abnormalities on her cervix at all, and then Skloot comes out and says, yet here she was, 3 months later with a full-fledged tumor. So I looked for parts where she used a little bit of sassiness and humor in this category. And then the next category was good descriptions of science. So one example of this was, freezing a cell was like pushing a pause button. Cell division, metabolism, and everything else simply stopped, then resumed after thawing as if you just pressed play again. Scientists could not pause cells at various intervals during an experiment so they could compare how certain cells reacted to a specific drug 1 week, then 2, then 6 after exposure. Then could look at identical cells at various points in time to study how they changed with age. And by freezing the cells at various points, they believed they could see the actual moment when a normal cell growing in culture becomes malignant, a phenomenon they call spontaneous transformation. So in this she used figurative language, comparing the freezing a cell to pressing a pause button, and she did a good job of giving a definition because it was really simple language that everybody could really understand when she was defining spontaneous transformation. And that's another thing I'd like to mention, is she was using a lot of simple language because she found that Henrietta's family was really uneducated, so she was just really trying to bring justice to their family, so she was just trying to use simple language so they would understand too. Another category I chose was introductions of characters and quotes. So for this I chose the most important quote that I found from the chapter and also who was all introduced. And I found what was really interesting was she brought in 72 people into the story, which is quite a bit, so that really shows how much research she put in to be able to dig all these resources out. I also looked into some awesome things she said, including descriptions and figurative language. So one example of this was, he wrongly believed that light could kill cell cultures. So his laboratory looked like a photo negative of the Ku Klux Klan rally, where technicians worked in long black robes, heads covered in black hoods with small slits cut for their eyes. They sat on black stools at black tables in a shadowless room with floors, ceilings, and walls painted black. The only illumination came from a small, dust-covered skylight. And I thought this was awesome because she was comparing this guy's laboratory to the Ku Klux Klan, which gives it a negative connotation without actually coming out and saying this guy was a bad guy, which he kind of really was. And the last category I charted was when she tried to depict the times Henrietta lived in. So, like I said, this was written by Rebecca Skloot, who's a freelance writer who specializes in science and medicine. And we're familiar with her work because she co-edited our textbook, The Best American Science Rating, with her dad, Floyd Skloot. And she's a very ethical reporter, so in fact, the first thing she wrote in this book was, "This is a book of nonfiction, no names have been changed, no characters invented, etc." She states where she got information, and she also says that she does her best to capture the language with which people wrote and spoke. So this was the category that I analyzed, was how she paid attention to the Ebonics and Southern draws and tried to show this when writing, which this can be tricky because a lot of people overdo this and make these people who are speaking sound kind of dumb. So I think she did a good job at picking what to use. So here's a snippet of that. It might be kind of small, but like she's really paying attention to Ebonics, like multiplying and growing and spreading. She's like chopping off the INGs, which is something that African Americans often do in their speech. So that's what I did to analyze this. And here's some pictures that she used in the book, which also shows that she's pretty ethical and just trying to bring justice to the family. There's Henrietta and her husband. He was also her cousin, by the way. And there's her cells. On the left, her cell is dividing. The middle green part is the telomere. And on the right, those are more of her cells. And the yellow is the nucleus. And there's a picture of her family nowadays. Her daughter Deborah is the one in the white. And as a whole, I think this book's pretty great. It felt like I was reading a book of fiction because it was really story-like, and because Skloot actually went out into the world and did this, it felt like you're actually there because she was using first person. And a lot of the events of the story were pretty crazy, especially during her childhood, which was really entertaining to read. And the book was set up really interesting because there was a lot of chapters, which made the book seem fast and easy to read too. And at the end it showed a "Where Are They Now" section, where it told where Henrietta's family is and what they're doing now, which was pretty cool too. And then there was a section that showed where she got all of her information, which was nice because we're in this class learning how to do this, and so we can use those ideas to do that in the future. And by doing this project, I learned a lot about cells and how to become a better writer because I charted a lot of sentences in this book, like a lot. And I could really pay attention to different figurative language and how she structured her sentences. And as a whole, I'm pretty glad I got to do this. Thank you.